Ganesh, you've been doing a lot of research on this JenX malware. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, actually, it's another day, another week, another IoT botnet.
Sure.
In this case, it's called a JenX botnet. It kind of leverages two exploits related to Realtek as well as Huawei routers.
IoT, DDoS, botnets have been in the topic for a while. We've seen Mirai. I think this one is basically taking existing vulnerabilities such as the Satori and improvising on it and making sure that it's sneaky and not noisy and you cannot easily detect it.
The interesting thing about JenX is basically this is hosted at some place where actually a gaming related activity is supported. Like, for example, multi-layer gaming. In this case, San Andreas, Grand Theft Auto, multiplayer programming actually support is done by this specific server farm. The same actors actually, they are also offering, DDoS protections to your GTA servers.
So they're selling both sides of that fence. They're selling the DDoS and they're selling the...
Yeah.
Are they selling DDoS or are they just using their botnet
Actually,
as
that's where I'm going.
Okay.
Actually, that's one part of it. Another product, the service they have is they're offering DDoS services attacks up to 300 gigabits per second.
That's...
just for $20.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so if they really have 300 gigabits per second, they're undercharging because that's very cheap, and that's a heck of a attack.
Deal,
too.
all right? Then I think that's why people will want to.
I mean, on one side of the coin, they're offering the protection for their gaming customers. On the other side, they're providing the basically DDoS attacks to give the users to maybe probably unfair advantage. If you're gaming, you want to take down your opponents.
Yeah, you take them offline.
You take them offline, and $20 for 300 gigabits.
Yeah.
It's very tempting for a an online gamer to probably fell into the trap.
The connection between DDoS and gaming has been around for, well, as long as internet gaming has been around. The whole idea of somebody who's running both sides of it is not unheard of, but certainly not very common.
On the x-axis, we have the timeline, and on the y-axis, actually, number of unique sources per hour. Basically, how many scanners we are seeing per hour. As you can see, I think here we are showing 30 days worth of data here. The ports are 52869 as well as 37215 TCP. We've shown in the graphically how these two ports worked in tandem, how at what point actually we have seen the spike. This botnet came around this time. As you see the little blip here, I think at the start of February.
So wait, the spike that we're seeing here, this is not, as far as we know, JenX? JenX is...
JenX actually
just
started
that blip?
Just that blip.
Huh. Okay.
But when we were looking back past 30 days, actually you see somewhere in the first week, January, there's a huge spike on these two activities. If we go back, I think, Matt, you probably remember, this is the timeline actually Satori source code has been leaked.
Okay.
So once it's been leaked, people are actually trying to, look for those ports, Everybody wants to take the share of it. With respect to what we found is the geographic distribution of the scanners used by this botnet at this point is heavily concentrated in Asia Pac. In this case, we see most of them are Asia Pac.
Yeah, looks like...
The gaming world there is pretty prevalent.
South Korea, probably?
Yeah. Actually, Matt is right on the money. It's South Korea and maybe followed a little bit of China.
Okay.
This is the initial set when we saw JenX in the first week of February.
Okay.
There are about 400 scanners at this time. And I have another interesting graph taking it further. This is almost new. It's from the last weekend, maybe. I think last Saturday.
Interesting.
This is on another port, 52869. Compared to Realtek and Huawei, actually, the Huawei port is actually more active compared to these 52869 sources I'm showing it here. But since the past few days, actually, the traffic on 52869 TCP has exploded. It's for the port 52869 I was talking it.
So your first graph showed up to like the 5th of February or just beyond that, but here's the continuation of that same graph?
A continuation of the same graph, but I want to show you, that level of actual scanning increased on 52869.
Yeah, significantly.
So it kind of went hand in hand until up to this point. I think it's the start of last weekend. And suddenly it went up. And I mean, kind of it's stabilizing a little bit there. But you can see here, at one point almost it reached, so 14 and now around actually I think 5,000 source scanners per hour.
Wow. And that's just for the 52869 bug. It doesn't seem like
52869.
there's any significant change
Not
in
much on
32715.
37215.
It's interesting to see this pattern, right? So because we are tracking data and you've been monitoring it, again going back to Matt's point, we're able to see the scale how it's changing. Right?
Yes.
So maybe I should ask you, does JenX have code once you've infected a machine? Does that machine also start scanning, or is it purely a DDoS bot at that point?
No, it can start scanning.
Okay.
But the controller has the capability. I think he can decide whether it can be part of the DDoS or not. That's how I think you leverage the 300 gigabits per second.
I wonder if the people who are their customers would even know the difference between a 300 gigabit per second DDoS attack and like a 5 gigabit per second DDoS attack.
I don't.
Because if you take somebody off a residential connection, 5 may do it just as well as 300.
Yeah, I mean maybe you can just do the amplification attack, one of the protocols they use for the gaming. And the average user doesn't even know what's the size of the attack, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is interesting to see that they're actually selling things like DDoS to a gaming world. So eventually the awareness is going to pick up, right? They may not know the bandwidth, skill, but the fact that we are going to see more and more of the IoT type attacks increase, and because those are the devices that really nobody's thinking about in terms of, a security view.
I think the cool thing about this one, I mean, from the design perspective, but not the malware, maliciousness perspective, they actually heavily borrow, how the Satori and the Mirai works.
The best thing that people can do is really to make sure that their devices are up to date. Unfortunately, some devices will never get patched, and that's not necessarily the fault of the user. That maybe just the company has decided to end of life certain hardware.
When you're making a decision to purchase any IoT device, just pay attention to the reputation of the vendor or the seller. Human tendency to go and grab the cheapest one, but the thing is, those cheapest devices may not have the security posters built into it, and they may not have the longevity, and the vendor may not support even the additional patches to make it more secure. The consideration should be given how a user can actually update the patches by themselves, because most of the devices doesn't have interface. So either you have to go through some web page, maybe some other means to go to the admin page and do the update the patches, maybe update the credentials.